Florence gritted her teeth and pressed her back against the wall as another wave of pain surged through her. She had wedged herself into the corner, knees drawn up, breath ragged, her hands clenched into the fraying fabric of her skirts. The room was dim, just a flicker of lantern light bobbing in the far corner and the shadows it failed to keep at bay. The hearth was empty, the fire long dead. She was alone. Thomas had gone silent 2 days before, left in the morning with his rifle and his disgust, and when he'd returned, it was only to bark that he'd done enough. He didn't look at her belly, didn't ask if she needed anything, just sat at the table and drank, his eyes like muddy ice, until he fell asleep in the chair, boots still on, hat over his face. He hadn't spoken since. Now, Florence bore down, jaw trembling. The pain split through her like lightning over the plains, and she screamed, a sound swallowed by the blizzard outside. She thought of her mother's voice, long gone now, soft, warm, shaped like safety. Her mother had once told her childbirth was like walking through a burning door to meet someone worth the fire. But the flames here were cold and silent. And she walked alone. Then, it happened. A slip, a tear, a gasp, and then, life. Cry, small but sure. A child, red and wrinkled and new, rested between her shaking knees. Florence sobbed and laughed in the same breath, shoulders racked with relief and disbelief. Her hands moved without thought, wrapping the child in the rough wool she'd prepared days before. Her fingers trembled as they traced the child's face. A girl. Of course it would be a girl. No one else could have made it through that storm. The door creaked open. Wind howled through the cabin like an old curse. Thomas stood there, shoulders hunched, snow on his hat, a half-drunk bottle swinging from one hand. He stepped in, eyes sweeping the room until they landed on the child. He didn't move closer. "It's a girl," Florence whispered, not as apology, not as explanation, but simply because the truth had weight. She looked up at him. "She's healthy." Thomas stared. A beat passed. Then another. He took a swig from the bottle and spat into the fireless hearth. "No good to me," he muttered, not to her, not really to anyone, and turned away. Florence's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her daughter mewled softly in her arms, nudging for warmth. She pulled the baby tighter against her chest, felt the small heartbeat against her own. Thomas stepped outside again, the door slamming behind him. She thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. An hour later he returned, face shadowed and mouth set like a dried-up riverbed. "You'll go," he said. "Tonight." She thought she had misheard. "What?" "I won't have a useless mouth eating through winter. You and the brat. Go." Her voice cracked. "It's snowing. We'll die out there." "That ain't my worry," he said, turning his back. "You'd throw out your own child?" He didn't answer. He only dropped a torn satchel on the floor, its leather stiff from disuse. Inside was a heel of bread and an old blanket. Florence stood slowly, her body still reeling from birth, legs weak and slick with blood. Her arms tightened around the baby, whose cries had gone quiet now, as if even she knew pleading was pointless. Florence's heart didn't shatter. It had already done that long ago. What she felt now was colder than grief. She wrapped her shawl around them both, tied the satchel to her shoulder, and stepped into the storm. Snow swallowed her whole. The wind screamed, tore at her dress, pulled at the baby's covering. She bent into it and walked, one step at a time, each footfall a silent protest against every man who had ever called her fragile. She had no plan, no map. The town was miles behind them, the wild country ahead. But she remembered seeing a stream once, not far from the woods where the deer moved in stillness. Maybe she could find shelter there. Maybe the rocks would offer a lean-to. Maybe the cold would be kinder than the man who sent her into it. Her vision blurred. Whether from pain or snow, she didn't know. Her knees buckled once. Then twice. The baby whimpered. Florence pressed her lips to the child's forehead. "I'm here," she murmured. "I'm here, my love." Hours, minutes, eternities passed. The sky was a sheet of iron. Her breath came shallower. The baby was quiet again, dangerously so. Florence knew what cold could do to little lungs. Then, finally, her body gave. She crumpled near a bend in the frozen creek, the baby tucked in her coat, her own arms the last barrier between life and loss. She couldn't feel her fingers, couldn't feel her legs. The snow settled on her shoulders like a burial shroud. She looked up at the sky, saw nothing but gray. She thought of how stories always spoke of light and death, of angels or warmth or voices. But all she saw was snow. Still, she smiled. Because the child was here. And the child had known love, even if only for one day. Her eyelids fluttered. The wind howled louder, or maybe it was her ears giving in. The edges of the world frayed. She whispered to the baby, not knowing if she would be heard. "You are not nothing. You are the best thing I've ever done." Then, something. A sound. Footsteps. Soft but deliberate. Not the crunch of a heavy boot, but the glide of moccasins on snow. A figure moved out of the woods, tall and wrapped in buffalo hide, a bough strapped across his back. His hair was long, tied at the nape with leather. His eyes swept the landscape like he could read it like a book. And he paused when he saw her. He didn't shout, didn't run. He knelt. For a moment, Florence thought she was imagining him, some spirit come to carry her off. But then warm hands gently lifted the baby from her arms, and another pressed against her neck, checking for the pulse of someone not yet dead. He spoke in Lakota, low and rhythmic. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the voice. He wrapped them in fur, drew them close, and lit a fire from sticks as if born from the snow itself. Florence stared up at him, her lips barely able to form sound. "Why?" she croaked, voice brittle as glass. He met her gaze. His voice, when he spoke in English, was soft as smoke. "Because you're still breathing." The flames crackled between them. Snow melted slowly on her lashes. She closed her eyes, not in surrender, but in trust. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone had come toward her. And in that flickering moment, where pain met warmth and fear met mercy, Florence did not feel abandoned. She felt seen. The snow fell softer come morning, as if the wind itself had grown tired of tearing at the earth. Pale light filtered through the skeletal trees, catching on frost-glazed branches and the hollow silence between bird-song and breath. Beneath that hush walked a man who made no sound. Cachalou moved like a shadow across the white world, his footprints a whisper behind him. The bough on his back was handmade, dark wood seasoned with time and use. He carried no rifle, no metal tools, only what the earth offered and what he needed to return to it. His long coat of buffalo hide hugged him against the cold, stitched with care and patience. His eyes, dark as turned soil, missed little. He was not supposed to be in this part of the valley. The hunt had taken him further east than he planned, and the deer had scattered, disturbed by something he hadn't yet seen. The air felt wrong. Still, he trusted the wind. And when it shifted, carrying with it the faintest sound, a whimper brittle as snapped grass, he paused. At first, he thought it a fox. Then a child. Then nothing. He tilted his head and listened again. There it was. Weak. Reedy. Human. Cachalou turned his path toward the sound, weaving through brush and drifts. A bend in the frozen creek opened before him, its edges crusted with ice, and there, half buried in snow, was a form. Two, he realized. One small. One grown. The woman was curled around the baby like a final act. Her back was stiff, her body unmoving save for the barely there rise of breath. Her hair clung to her face in frozen strands, and her lips were tinged blue. The child was nestled beneath her shawl, no longer crying, silent as a seed waiting for spring. Cachalou knelt beside them, heart tightening in his chest. He saw no tracks leading to this place, only faint depressions where she must have stumbled, dragging herself forward, birthing pain into motion. She had not come far, but she had come far enough to die. He brushed snow from her face with the back of his hand, gentle as a leaf touching water. The woman's skin was cold but not empty. She was alive. He reached for the child next, pressing fingers to the tiny chest. A pulse. Slow, but there. There were words he could have spoken. Prayers. Warnings. Comforts. But he kept them inside. Words were a sacred thing, and he had learned not to waste them. Instead, he lifted the child into the curve of his arm and then, with practiced ease, slid the woman onto his back. She groaned faintly, and her head lolled against his shoulder. The baby shifted once, then fell quiet again. Cachalou walked. The journey was long, not in distance, but in the weight of what he carried. The woman was light, starved, perhaps, or newly emptied by birth, but the burden was more than flesh. He could feel the history in her bones, the ache in her limbs, the story that had driven her into a storm to die in silence. By the time the woods opened into the winter camp, smoke from the hearths rose like prayer threads toward the sky. The village was small, just a circle of 6 dwellings, tucked beneath a hill that broke the worst of the wind. Here stayed those who no longer moved with a larger band: elders, healers, the injured, and those who chose stillness over survival through war. He stepped into the largest of the lodges, the one built of thick hides and willow poles, where warmth lived year-round. Inside, the fire glowed low, and a pair of women looked up. One was young, the other ancient, Fiaka, the grandmother of the winter people. Her hair was silver, braided in loops beside her ears, and her eyes were dark enough to swallow secrets. Without a word, Cachalou laid the woman down near the hearth and passed the child to Fiaka, who held the baby against her chest, listening. The old woman made a sound in her throat, not displeasure, not concern, just acknowledgement. She turned to the younger woman and barked an order. Herbs. Blankets. Water. Cachalou sat at the edge of the lodge, close enough to watch but far enough to not disturb. The woman stirred only once, eyes fluttering open for a breath, before sleep dragged her back under. The baby, warmed and fed with goat's milk from a skin bag, settled quickly. Fiaka turned to him, her voice low. "This one ran from death," she said. "It almost caught her." He nodded. "She have a name?" She did not speak. The elder hummed. "Then the spirits will give her a new one." The camp moved around them slowly in the days that followed. Cachalou returned each evening to sit near the lodge. He brought rabbit and dried berries. He carved small figures from bone and wood, one of a deer, one of a bird, one shaped like the curling belly of a mother. He did not give them away, just placed them near the sleeping place of the woman and the child. On the 3rd night, she woke. Florence blinked at the ceiling of the lodge, the smoke hole above her framing a single star. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her hands were tucked in fur. Her baby was asleep beside her, cheeks pink with warmth. She turned her head and saw him, the man who had found her. He was sitting cross-legged, sharpening a knife on a smooth stone, the sound barely louder than a sigh. His hair was long, a black river over his shoulders. His eyes met hers, steady, calm. She tried to speak but coughed instead. He reached for a bowl of tea and passed it to her without a word. She sipped, the warmth chasing shadows from her throat. "I thought I died," she whispered. "You didn't." Silence stretched between them, not empty but thoughtful. "You saved us." He looked down at the knife, then back at her. "You saved her. I just brought you the rest of the way." Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with something more fragile. She didn't thank him. The words felt too small. Instead, she looked at the sleeping child and said, "Her name's Clara." Cachalou repeated it softly, tasting it. "Clara." Florence watched him. He moved without wasted energy, spoke only when needed. But there was no hardness in him, no suspicion or coldness, just presence, as if he had learned to stay where others fled. She reached out, fingers brushing the edge of the wooden deer. "Did you make these?" He nodded. "They're beautiful." He shrugged lightly. "They help me think." She stared at the fire. "Why did you help me?" He paused before answering. "Because you were alive. That was all. No deeper reason. No burden of debt. Just simple truth." That night, Florence slept deeply, not because her pain was gone, but because her fear had lessened. Just a little. Enough. Over the next days, she began to move more. Fiacca taught her how to fold cloth the Lakota way, how to carry Clara in a cradleboard made from softened bark and leather. The other women did not press her with questions. They saw what her silence held. And Cachalou, always nearby, offered help without pride. He handed her firewood, sharpened a needle, showed her where wild onions grew near the thawing stream. They spoke rarely, but something passed between them in glances, in gestures. One evening, she asked his name. Cachalou, he said. It means, he who is quiet. She smiled. Seems fitting. And for the first time, he smiled back, small, unpracticed, but real. The days grew longer, the snow thinner. Florence stood taller now when she walked, her strength returning. Clara giggled often. Cachalou made her a rattle from pebbles inside a hollowed gourd. Still, Florence did not know what came next. She could not stay forever. But neither did she know how to go. Her heart, once bruised by every choice, now hesitated not from fear, but from the strange sense that she was, for the first time, allowed to decide what she wanted. And she did not yet want to leave. Cachalou sat beside her one night as the moon hung low. Clara slept in her arms, and the fire crackled soft and slow. Florence looked at him, voice barely above a breath. What kind of man walks through a blizzard to save a stranger? He looked out toward the trees. One who knows what it means to be lost. The thaw did not come quickly, but it came with intention, first as dripping water from eaves, slow and steady as breath, then as puddles darkening the snow's edge, and finally as small shoots pressing through frost like green prayers. Spring on the prairie was not a sudden bloom but a patient unfolding, the land testing its own resilience. Florence felt the same change stirring in herself, though she did not speak of it. She simply rose earlier each morning, her muscles less stiff, her gait more sure. Her hands, once clumsy with fatigue and fear, had learned how to twist sinew into cord, how to stir porridge without burning the bottom, how to read the small signs in Cachalou's expressions that spoke more than most men's mouths ever could. She had not meant to stay so long. At first, it had been survival. Then it was gratitude. Then it became something else she couldn't yet name. Clara thrived among the Lakota. She was passed from arm to arm like a blessing. The elders clucked their tongues at her pink cheeks, rubbed her belly, whispered her new names, Winjiengska, little white woman, or Wakang Sikala, small sacred one. Florence had worried at first that her presence, and Clara's, might not be welcome. But the people here did not treat her as an outsider. They treated her as someone who had simply arrived late to the circle. Cachalou remained constant. He spoke when he had something worth saying, and when he was silent, it did not feel like distance but like understanding. He carved more. Small birds now, tiny horses with arched necks, and once she caught him making a likeness of Clara, her head round and wobbly, the carved smile too wide but earnest. He tucked it into a pouch when he saw her watching. "You can keep it," she said. He paused. "She's not mine." "She wouldn't be alive without you," Florence said, gently. "That counts for something." He didn't respond, not right away. Later that night, she found the carving tucked beside the woven basket that held Clara's swaddles. They shared little rituals without realizing it. She made tea in the mornings. He brought herbs without being asked. He sat near when Clara cried too long, letting his stillness calm them both. She mended a tear in his coat without ceremony. He accepted it without comment, but wore it every day after. One morning, Florence found herself laughing. A boy named Kangi had tripped over his own boots trying to show off for Clara, and the child had squealed with delight. The sound of Florence's laughter startled her. She stood still afterward, hand over her mouth, like someone who'd heard a voice in a place meant for silence. Cachalou looked up from where he was cleaning a fish. "It's good," he said simply. "What is?" she asked, recovering. "To hear that. From you." She sat beside him, watching the knife move smoothly through scales. "I forget sometimes," she said, "what it's like to feel like more than a problem." He didn't answer right away, but his fingers slowed. You were never the problem, he said. The men around you were just too small to see the size of you. Her breath caught in her throat. It was not flattery. It was not charm. It was a kind of truth that sounded like a gift. He rinsed the fish, set it aside, and stood. Come, he said. I want to show you something. She followed him beyond the edge of camp, Clara slung on her back, warm and heavy in the cradleboard. They walked in silence, the kind that feels safe. Cachalou led her to a bend in the creek where the water had begun to move again, trickling between stones like it had never forgotten how. There, tucked between rocks, grew the first bright buds of prairie crocus, purple and defiant. He knelt and brushed snow away gently. My sister loved these, he said. Florence crouched beside him. You had a sister? He nodded. Maka. She was 4 years younger. Always following me, always asking questions. She made me laugh when I didn't want to. What happened to her? His jaw tightened. They came through our village. Soldiers. Said we were too close to the rail line. Said we were trespassing on land that's been ours longer than they had a name for it. His voice was quiet, but not weak. Maka ran. They shot her anyway. Florence said nothing for a long time. Her hands rested over Clara's sleeping back. I'm so sorry, she finally said. Cachalou's eyes were on the crocus. I see her in the flowers sometimes. Not always. But sometimes. Like now. She didn't ask how he could bear it. She understood. They stayed there until Clara stirred, her fingers curling in sleep. Cachalou stood and offered a hand. Florence took it without hesitation, letting him pull her up. He didn't let go immediately. Later, back at the camp, Fiacca called Florence into her lodge. The old woman's eyes were sharp and knowing. She handed Florence a bundle of hides and sinew. You'll make a winter coat, the elder said. For yourself. If you stay, you must not wear thread from another world. Florence nodded, unsure whether it was a suggestion or a decision already made. That night, Florence sat beside the fire, sewing slowly, her stitches uneven but improving. Cachalou watched from across the flames, carving a new figure. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Her hands worked the hide as her mind worked a different question. What would it mean to stay? She had nothing left behind her but cold walls and a name spoken with disdain. Ahead, there was no promise of riches, no grand future. But there was warmth here. Kindness. The kind that grows in silence and does not ask for thanks. The conflict inside her was not about whether to stay, it was whether she deserved this peace after so much breaking. Whether she was allowed to build something new when so much of her old life had been taken from her. Clara gurgled in her sleep. Florence leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. I want her to grow up knowing she's worth something, she whispered. Cachalou's voice came from the dark. She already does. Florence looked up. How do you know? Because she sees how you carry her, how you speak to her. She sees that you survived. The fire crackled between them. A branch split and fell. You always say exactly what I need to hear, she said, half smiling. I only say what's true. The next morning, she woke to find a new cradleboard beside the one she had been using. This one was carved with birds at the top, and a pattern of stars along the base. It was smoother, stronger, and wrapped in red-dyed sinew. Her hand went to her mouth. She traced the carvings with reverence. She turned and saw Cachalou near the fire, pretending not to watch. Florence carried Clara in it that day. Everyone noticed. No one spoke. Later, as the sun dipped and painted the snow in hues of gold and amber, Florence sat beside Cachalou. She looked toward the hills and said, When the snow's gone, will you leave? He didn't answer right away. I follow the seasons, he said. I don't belong in one place too long. Florence's hands folded in her lap. And if someone asked you to stay? He looked at her then, really looked, as if trying to find the shape of what she meant inside the calm of her voice. That would be new, he said. But I would listen. Her heart stuttered, not from fear, but from recognition. That night, after the others slept and the fire was low, Florence wrote a name in the dirt near her bed. Her old name. The one she had carried like a burden. She stared at it for a while, then brushed it away with her hand. The days stretched longer now. Clara crawled. The river moved faster. Birds returned. And Florence, whose life had once ended in a snowstorm, now woke each day to the smell of wood smoke and the sound of people who saw her not as a woman ruined, but as a woman becoming. It did not feel like a new life. It felt like the life she had always hoped might find her, quietly, when she had stopped believing. And it had. In the cold. In the quiet. In the steady, watchful eyes of a warrior who walked without noise, but saw everything. The thaw came fast that week, stealing the last of winter with greedy fingers. Ice cracked in the trees like old bones snapping, and birds returned with hungry cries, darting between branches as if they couldn't believe the sky was theirs again. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap, and the ground softened beneath each footstep, holding imprints longer than before. Florence felt that same loosening inside herself. She'd begun to laugh more freely, to hum while tending the fire, to wrap Clara's cradleboard in ribboned bits of dyed cloth gifted by the elder women. Her fingers had grown steady, her back stronger. The grief was still there. Some losses don't melt with snow, but it no longer ruled her. It lived in a quiet room of her heart, not the whole house. Cachalou had taken her to the river again just days ago. They'd sat beneath the trembling leaves, Clara gurgling between them, while he pointed out where the trout would soon return. Florence had asked if he would fish there when they came, and he had said yes, in a tone that felt more like a promise than a plan. She didn't press. She didn't need to. Some answers lived in the way a man looked at you when you weren't watching. That morning, Florence had braided her hair for the first time in weeks. She did it without thinking, and when Fiacca saw her, the old woman only nodded and said, "You remember who you are now." The words stayed with her as she ground corn beside the fire, humming a tune her mother had once sung when the sky was pink and the house was warm. Clara played with a set of wooden animals near her feet, one shaped like a deer and the other like a bear. She chewed on the bear's ear with great determination. It was Fiacca who first noticed the tracks. The old woman was gathering herbs near the edge of the hill when she stilled, straightened, and narrowed her eyes toward the tree-line. Florence didn't see her at first. She was busy cleaning a pot, lost in the rhythm of soot and water, until Fiacca's voice cut through the quiet. "Men are coming." Florence rose so quickly her knees cracked. She turned toward the hill's edge and followed the direction of the old woman's gaze. There, just visible between the trees, were dark shapes, 3, maybe 4. Riders. Moving slow, like they were looking for something. Or someone. Fear bloomed in her stomach like a sickness. She knew that shape on the lead horse. Even hunched forward, even at a distance. That slack, bitter posture. That hat pulled too low. Thomas. She couldn't breathe. For a moment, the world shrank to the size of her chest, tight and shuddering. The man who had cast her into the snow was now riding toward her with strangers at his back, their faces unreadable from here but their presence clear in every heavy hoof-print. Cachalou was not in camp. She scanned the hill, her heart slamming. He'd gone west that morning to check the snares. She didn't know when he would return. She didn't know if he even knew they were coming. Fiacca touched her arm. "Inside. Take the child. I will speak." Florence didn't argue. She scooped Clara into her arms and ducked into the lodge, her breath ragged, her hands shaking as she tucked the child against her chest. She peeked through the flap, watching. The riders entered the clearing without haste, without shame. Thomas's eyes flicked over the lodges, over the people standing outside, calm but alert. When he saw Fiacca, he pulled his horse to a stop. "Old woman," he called, "I'm looking for my wife." Fiacca stood like stone. "She was cast from your home. The spirits took her in. She is no longer yours." "I didn't come for stories," Thomas snapped, dismounting. "I came for what's mine. Her and the girl. I have rights." Florence wanted to scream, to rush out and say she was no one's property, that she had survived without him, that she had become someone he could never understand. But she held her tongue, felt the warmth of Clara's breath against her neck, and waited. Another man dismounted, a broad-shouldered one with a scar across his chin. He looked around like he was measuring the village for something. Not people. Value. Can't see how they live like this, he muttered. One of the other men laughed. Thomas turned back to Fiacca. If you don't hand them over, we'll take them. You don't want trouble. Florence saw the old woman lift her chin. Trouble already came when you threw blood into the snow. We only picked it up. Thomas stepped forward. I got law on my side. Fiacca did not move. You have weakness. And cowardice. The law does not change that. The man with the scar stepped forward, hand brushing his belt. We ain't gonna argue with a bunch of savages. Florence stood, clutching Clara. She could not stay hidden if this turned to blood. Just as she took a step toward the lodge flap, a voice rang out across the camp. Put your hand down. Cachalou. He came from behind them, his stride measured, his bow slung across his shoulder. He walked with the calm of someone who knew every eye was watching and feared none of them. The men turned. You must be the one who stole her, Thomas said, sneering. Makes sense. Redskin like you probably couldn't resist. Cachalou didn't flinch. He kept walking until he stood between the men and the lodge where Florence waited. I found a mother and child freezing to death, he said. I gave them fire. That is not theft. She's my wife, Thomas barked. She was your wife, Cachalou replied, voice quiet. Until you sent her into the storm. Thomas's face twisted. You think you can just keep her? Like a prize. She's not a prize, Cachalou said. She's a person. Florence stepped out then, Clara wrapped tightly against her. She stood behind Cachalou, but not hidden. Her voice was clear. I will not go with you. Thomas turned toward her, mouth open. You have no rights here, she said. Not over me. Not over Clara. You left us to die. You're my wife, he shouted. No, she said. I was. Until you became something no man should ever be. She stepped forward then, next to Cachalou. The entire village had gathered in a wide ring, not hostile, but solid. Present. Fiacca spoke again. She chooses her own path now. You have no say in it. Thomas's face colored with rage, but the others with him shifted uncomfortably. The scarred man muttered something and turned toward his horse. The others followed. Thomas looked at Florence one last time. His eyes were empty, not with sorrow, not with guilt, but with the dull absence of someone who had never truly seen the people around him. You'll regret this, he said, mounting his horse. Florence didn't respond. Neither did Cachalou. The riders turned, retreated into the trees. The snow still held their hoofprints long after they were gone. Cachalou stood beside her for a long moment. Neither of them spoke. Then Florence turned to him. You didn't have to stand between us. I didn't, he said. I stood with you. Fiacca approached them and placed a hand on Clara's back. Some ashes, the old woman said softly, try to rise again. But wind remembers. Fire remembers. And the ones who survive, they learn to burn in a different way. That night, the village feasted. Not to celebrate confrontation, but survival. Florence sat beside Cachalou near the fire, Clara asleep in her arms. They ate rabbit and cornmeal, and someone passed around sweet-root tea. No one asked if she was staying. No one asked what she would do next. They all already knew. Florence looked at the stars overhead. For years, they had seemed cold and distant. But now they blinked like watchful elders, steady and quiet. She leaned her head against Cachalou's shoulder. He didn't move away. In the firelight, in the hush after fear, she began to believe in something she had never dared name. Not safety. Belonging. The river had begun to speak again. It moved with the rhythm of old stories, patient and deliberate, carrying winter's memory downstream where it would feed distant soil. The ice was gone now, broken into silver shards weeks ago, and the banks were soft with new grass. Willow branches drooped low to drink, and the wind carried their whispers inland, telling tales of what had passed, of who had endured. Florence walked there often, Clara cradled against her back, her steps sure on the muddy trail. She wore the winter coat she'd stitched herself, the seams a little uneven, the hide a bit stiff still, but it held warmth the way a promise does. Beside her walked Cachalou, silent as ever, his eyes scanning the horizon not in worry, but in knowing. Since Thomas's departure, no men had returned. No soldiers. No bounty seekers. The village had settled back into rhythm. Yet something had shifted inside Florence, some wire pulled tight after years of dull ache now snapping into clarity. She was not running anymore. She was watching, choosing, beginning to imagine. They stopped near a bend in the river, where moss blanketed the rocks and deer came often to drink. Clara was asleep, her breath soft against Florence's shoulder. "She dreams loudly," Cachalou said. Florence smiled. "She gets that from me." Cachalou sat on a sun-warmed stone, legs folded. He reached for a flat piece of driftwood and began carving again, slow and precise. "Does it help?" she asked, settling beside him. He didn't look up. "Yes." The hands remember things the heart cannot yet explain. They sat in silence, the kind that grows only between people who do not need to prove anything to each other. The air smelled of green things and running water. Birds called from high branches. "You could go, you know," she said after a time. "Now that the snow is gone. You could follow the herd, return to your people." He paused in his carving, the woodbird half-shaped in his lap. "I could," he said. "But the river does not rush." She turned to look at him. "What does that mean?" "It means sometimes it takes time to know where you want to carve." She held his gaze, her breath catching. There was something in his face she had not seen so openly before, not just calm or care, but longing. Quiet, buried, but blooming now like wildflowers through thawed soil. "I want to stay," she said, simply. "Not because I must. Because I choose to." Cachalou looked down, ran his thumb along the bird's wing. "Then we carved together." They returned to camp that evening in soft light, the sun casting long gold shadows across the lodges. Clara had awoken just before they reached the edge of the trees, her laugh bright and sudden like a song remembered. The villagers greeted them with nods, the way family does when no words are needed. Florence went to grind herbs with Fiacca while Cachalou helped a boy string a bow. The world moved as it always had, but Florence felt its rhythm in her bones now. Not as an outsider, not as a stranger, as someone woven in. But peace, as Florence knew too well, was a fragile thing, and it always walked with its back to the wind. The messenger came 2 days later, one of the runners from the larger camp to the north. He arrived before dawn, breathless and wide-eyed, his face streaked with dried mud and smoke. He spoke in hurried Lakota, and Fiacca, after listening, turned grim. Florence waited near the fire, arms wrapped around Clara, who sensed something wrong and would not settle. Cachalou stepped away from the circle of elders and came to her, his face unreadable. "There was a raid," he said. "A camp upriver. Soldiers burned it down. They're moving south. No warning." Her blood turned cold. "Here," she whispered. "Not yet. But maybe." Florence's first thought was not of herself. It was of Clara, the child who had survived so much already, whose life had only just begun to feel like her own. The village stirred into motion. Provisions were gathered. Snares were packed. Elders argued quietly near the council fire. Some wanted to flee deeper into the trees. Others wanted to stand, not in violence, but in presence. Cachalou stood at the edge of it all, unmoving, his hands clenched at his sides. "They will come looking," Florence said quietly. "You know they will. They'll see this place and see only what they've always seen, something in their way." Cachalou nodded. "I won't let Clara be taken," she said, her voice breaking. "You won't have to," he replied. That night, as dusk slipped into violet, Florence sat with Fiacca beside the fire. "I cannot run again," she said. "You do not have to run," the old woman answered. "You just have to root." Florence looked down at her child, who slept with her mouth open, tiny hand curled into the hide of her mother's coat. "I want to protect her," she said. "Then you must become stone and wind, soft in love, but unmovable in purpose." Florence did not sleep that night. She lay awake beside Cachalou, listening to the way his breath moved like the trees, slow, deep, grounded. Just before the first pink of dawn, she leaned in close and whispered, "If they come, I won't hide." "I know," he whispered back. And when the sun rose, it rose on a village not afraid, but ready. The soldiers came at midday, 4 of them, riding hard and loud, as if noise could justify intrusion. Their uniforms were dirted, their eyes bloodshot. One of them wore a badge. Another had a whip tied to his saddle. They halted at the edge of the camp, boots crunching dry beneath them. The villagers stood in silence. No weapons, no raised hands, just presence. The lead soldier stepped forward. "We're looking for a white woman and child," he said, not even pretending courtesy. "Ran off from her husband. There's a warrant." Florence stepped forward, Clara on her hip. "I'm here," she said. "And I ran from no one. I was cast out." The man sneered. "Don't matter. She's his. You're aiding fugitives. This here's federal land." "No," Cachalou said, stepping up beside her. "This is elder land. Fire land. And you don't speak for the earth." The soldier spat. "You want to be a hero, savage?" "No," Cachalou said, calm. "Only a witness." A standoff followed, not of weapons, but of will. Florence stepped past him, holding Clara high, her eyes hard as flint. "You'll have to take her from me," she said. The soldier blinked. "What?" "If you want her, you'll have to pry her from my arms. You'll have to strike a woman holding a child in front of every soul here. You'll have to live with that weight." The wind moved. The camp stood silent. The soldier looked around, saw faces not of fear, but of certainty. Cachalou beside her, unflinching. Fiacca, eyes blazing like coals. Even the children stood still, unmoved. The man cursed under his breath. He turned his horse. "We'll report this," he growled. "Then speak truly," Cachalou said. "Tell them a mother chose her child. Tell them a woman did not bend." They rode away. No blood spilled. But something larger was claimed that day. Florence wept afterward, not in fear or relief, but in release. Cachalou held her while she trembled. Clara pressed between them, warm and safe. And when the wind settled, when the sun lowered once more behind the ridges, Florence stepped to the river alone and knelt. She scooped up a smooth stone, held it in her palm, and whispered her old name to it. Then she placed it in the current. The water carried it away without a ripple. When she returned to the camp, she did not speak of it. But the next morning, she tied a string of woven grass around her wrist, made not of thread from her old life, but from the land she now called home. Cachalou saw it, said nothing, only placed a matching one on his own wrist. And so the woman who had been cast into snow now stood where spring rose from thaw, her roots deep, her fire steady. The river did not rush, but it carved.